All right, welcome in. Late Kick is live. It is Sunday night, November 21st, the year of our Lord 2021. One of the most jam-packed shows I believe we've ever had. These are the shows that you can't miss. Told you Thursday night, don't miss this Sunday show. I didn't know exactly what we were going to be talking about, but it was inevitable. We were going to be jam-packed. Of course, it's Sunday night. That means it is rapid reaction night. We've got a whole bunch of Week 12 in the rearview mirror. Dan Mullen is out at Florida. Those of you that may have been tuned out of college football today, tuned into the pro game, and you're just coming back for the show tonight, which is more people than you may think. There are a lot of folks who don't even know Dan Mullen's been fired. Well, he's out. So, of course, we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to look backwards and forwards. I've already got a few names to keep an eye on in the Florida coaching search, which is, about 8 hours old. We will discuss the playoff picture. Still really foggy. There are some questions about which teams control their own destiny, which teams don't. Two-loss Bama, how does the committee handle them? Does Cincinnati have a better shot? Now, I'm going to discuss it all tonight, so we're going to be jam-packed. Settle in. We're not going anywhere. We don't have time constraints. This is not traditional television or radio. We'll just end when everything that needs to be said has been said. Appreciate you guys joining us. We were in Columbus yesterday. Renaissance Tour announcement coming in just a second. Also, we have got, how many, Jesse? 4 or 5? I think 5 early best bets tonight. The Ramen Noodle Express is so hot that you get second-degree burns just by uttering its name. And so we put the pedal down the last 2 weeks. It has paid off for us. We've already put it down this week. It is whatever the word that is stronger than imperative is, it is stronger than imperative that you are following on Twitter or you are missing line value at Late Kick Josh. We put 5 of them out. 2 of them have already moved. I'm going to give you those before the end of the show. So we've got all that to come, and we're going to do it somehow in under 2 hours. Maybe, I don't know, even under an hour. We'll see. We will not press our luck, though. So we were in Columbus yesterday. I have got, actually in my pocket right here, hold on. I've got a buck nut. It's the first one I have ever held in my hand. You can hear it if I drop it. It actually has a little more bounce than I thought these things had. A member of the Ohio State band handed that to me. May have gotten in trouble for getting out of formation, but took the risk, handed it to me. And so I said, Luke, I'm going to throw it on the show for you. So, Luke, there you go. It came back to Nashville with me last night. Got it through TSA. They had no problems. That's the thing about a buck nut. It's not very metallic, so you can get it through security. The trip to Columbus was great. The splattering, the funeral of a game, not so much. But I will discuss that in great detail on this show and then in much greater detail on the Tuesday morning Late Kick Extra podcast. But what you want to know as we kick off every Sunday show with is where is the Renaissance Tour headed for this upcoming week? Now, let me tell you what this week entails. It's Thanksgiving week, right? So that means a lot of you are going to be on the road traveling. I'm going to be on the road traveling. I'm headed home. Home for me is Columbus, Georgia. That is just 45 short minutes to the east of Auburn, Alabama. And that is where Jordan-Hare Stadium is, and that's where they play the Iron Bowl this year between Alabama and Auburn. And I have not missed an Iron Bowl in I don't know how long. So where is the Renaissance Tour headed this week? Well, Director Colin, I don't think we need to keep them waiting any longer. Let's tell the folks where the Renaissance Tour is headed this week. Because I'm not taking the drive. I'm going to get on a plane and fly to Detroit and then hop on over to Ann Arbor, Michigan. We are going to Ohio State versus Michigan. Forecast high right around the freezing mark. I doubt it gets that high, but this is a massive game. Fresh off Ohio State just splattering Michigan State yesterday. This line comes out, and it's Ohio State minus 7.5. A lot of people are shocked by that. A lot of people very surprised. People maybe who follow this game, not so surprised. I have never gotten to see this game in person. I have tried and A, never been able to get up there, and B, I've never been able to square it with previously having just covered games in the South. Well, now we can do it, and now we're doing it. And I got one request. Okay, yesterday, I got a buck nut in Columbus. Here's what I need. Parking in Ann Arbor, Michigan is atrocious. It is very hard to get, even for esteemed members of the media and people like me. Here's what I need. I'm giving you 6 days advance notice. Someone's got to come through for me up there. As of now, I'm going to park somewhere near Wisconsin. And so what I need is I need someone in close proximity to that stadium to lock me down 2 or 3 parking passes. I know that they are like cutting an arm off to try and get. Trust me, I've looked at them. And if it comes to pass, I'll just whip the company card out and waste some executive's kid's inheritance on paying for a parking spot. I would much rather just get hooked up because, to be honest with you, I love free stuff. And in this case, even our bosses would love free stuff. Whoever's got a spot, hit me up. You know my email, joshpate706@gmail.com. I will be waiting. I've asked our audience to come through a few times this year. You have. I doubt this will be any different. So let's dive into the show tonight. Dan Mullen has been fired at the University of Florida. Dan Mullen's tenure is very, very interesting because it was just this time last year he was about to head to the SEC championship game. They were going to end up playing Bama, as it turned out, as good as any team played Bama last year. That Bama 2020 team, not quite like the 2021 team, one of the best we've ever seen. And they won the East, and yet we fast forward 1 year later and Dan Mullen's out of a job. And you know, as I thought about it driving in today, Dan Mullen's tenure went in a very GIF-like fashion. And one of my go-tos for a long time has been the GIF of that guy in his backyard who wants to accelerate a fire by pouring gas on it. Most of you are 6 years old the first time you try this. But when you try and accelerate that fire by pouring gas on it, things go sideways, and the thing about it is they go sideways really quickly. You don't have time to react. Once you've done that one stupid thing, other consequences follow faster than you can ever react. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, that right there, about the time Dan Mullen poured the gas on the fire, that's about the time he's explaining to you why it's okay that his team quit on him last year. Around the bowl game, or conversely, you could even go earlier than that. You could even go to the LSU game where he did not have his team ready to play. And they spoiled an opportunity to make what 2020 could have been, and that could have been a great year. Instead, it was just a ho-hum year, even though they ended up beating Georgia, even though they won the division. And so then the fire spreads really quickly and you can't put it out. And this year, two of my biggest fears when talking about Mullen, and I've talked about it a lot on the show, I'm not going to rehash this all, but two of my biggest fears from Mullen, they both verified. The first one was, of course, his flirtation with the NFL last year and him, in my opinion, being convinced there was a spot for him in Sunday ball and there wasn't. I don't think that he ever got back fully. And I don't think he ever got his team back fully. I don't think Florida football was ever checked back in under Dan Mullen after last year. That was my first fear. My second fear was that LSU game. My second fear was that LSU game put something that was irreversible in motion. Now, it wasn't that Dan Mullen was going to lose his job after the LSU game. It wasn't that Dan Mullen was going to lose his job after the way the season ended last year. But what could have happened, and in retrospect, it looks like what did happen, is a chain of events got put in motion. The snowball kind of got kicked down the hill that day. That's where I draw it back to. That afternoon, as a 24-point favorite with a lot to play for, Florida gets embarrassed, gets humbled in their own building, and they weren't ready to play. I know there were some ugly scenes before that last year, you know, like the Missouri game or whatever, but I draw the line right there. That's the point in history where I think things started to go downhill for Dan Mullen. But as much as it has sounded over the past, let's say, 3 weeks, like I'm anti-Dan Mullen or like I have some axe to grind against Dan Mullen, I don't. And I also don't think Dan Mullen's overrated. I've heard a lot of that today. Dan Mullen was always overrated. Dan Mullen was overrated only if you didn't know how to properly rate him. I thought we always had a pretty good feel for who Dan Mullen was. Dan Mullen, really good Saturday guy, a really good game day coach. I think there are a lot of people who believe he's a little overrated in his ability to develop the quarterback position. I don't feel that way. I think he's a pretty good developer of quarterbacks. But I think he's a really good strategic mind. I think he's a really good offensive mind. But there are certain limitations because of his approach, because of his style, and in some ways because of his personality and view of the game that put a really hard cap on what his program at Florida was capable of. That was always my perception of him. And so if that's how you perceived him, he wasn't overrated. No one ever compared him to Saban. I don't think many smart people were comparing him, no pun intended, to Kirby Smart this past year. There were some people who said, well, because they won in Jacksonville, that must mean Dan Mullen has surpassed Kirby Smart. We didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that. Obviously, if you watch this show, you know that. As a program is concerned, Florida never bypassed Georgia. And as a coach is concerned, therefore, Dan Mullen never surpassed Kirby Smart. But he has been, at times, an excellent coach on game day. And I think he's going to get another shot, and I think Dan Mullen's going to succeed somewhere else. Just because things staled and they were irreversible at Florida doesn't mean Dan Mullen as a coach is an irreversible failure. I don't feel that way about the guy at all. What I think he would be best served to do is I think he'd be best served to take a timeout like Kevin Sumlin did not do. Take a timeout, come in one of these things. Go find a TV studio somewhere. Dan Mullen would be a lot better on TV than you think he'd be, by the way. Go find yourself a studio in Bristol, Connecticut, or LA, anywhere. Go find a studio and sit in there and endear yourself to the public a little bit, first off. Let them see a side of you they don't know exists. And thirdly, to steal a line from Jim Ross, just go away for a little while. Go learn a new hold. That's what they have to do in pro wrestling sometimes. When the crowd stales on you, you just go away for a while. In reality, nothing's changing about you. They just say, go learn a new hold. Dan Mullen needs to go learn a new hold. When he comes back eventually, where he needs to come back is not somewhere where people focus on recruiting 24/7. Hello. It's almost like they had an idea in mind when they named the company. Go to a place in like the Big 12 or go to a place at the G5 level and then work your way back up. Either that or philosophically change the way you approach this game. Those are the two options for Dan Mullen. But it's not a surprise. It had to be done. This was not knee-jerk in any sense of the word. But Dan Mullen's out. And that's the bottom line as it relates to him. But now, having said that, the fun part begins for Florida fans. So here you go, Colin, a natural end for you. So Dan Mullen's out, and we've discussed that. Where is Florida going from here? Because this is about to be really interesting, and there were some thoughts that I've shared with you over the last 14 days, really, about how I thought a lot of the talk out there was foolish about the Florida job and about Dan Mullen and whether you needed to see more from him. You didn't need to see any more. You didn't need to see last night. In fact, I think it's pathetic that some folks believe in their heart of hearts they needed to see Missouri convert 2 points at the end of a game in overtime to know whether Dan Mullen was good enough. Now, it ended up going against Florida, and so he's out of a job. If it really came down to that, shame on the folks in charge. I'm not so sure that's the way it actually happened. But you don't have to take it from me. Scott Strickland, the athletic director down there, he did speak on this. He had a press conference today. They don't have to do that for you, by the way. So hats off to Scott Strickland for at least stepping up and speaking to the public. He was asked a number of things, obviously. Scott Strickland being the AD down there. And he's been with Mullen for a long time. He was with Mullen at Mississippi State and at Florida. So this was probably not an easy conversation that he had with Dan Mullen. But he was asked, I believe, by Andy Staples, what is the expectation? What do you expect in the next head coach? And his quote was, the expectation at Florida is to compete at a high level and compete for a sustained period of time. Very important. That is directly correlated with recruiting. What he's saying is we don't want to build to a crescendo every 3 or 4 years. This is not some developmental project of a program. No, we need to be there every year. Our neighbors in Athens or Tuscaloosa or Baton Rouge, we expect the same thing they expect. He's right. He should feel that way. Number two, and this is what I've been harping on for a while now. Folks have been talking about this crowded market. Everybody and their cousin has been talking about how, well, Florida's not already in the market. They need to just pump the brakes because this market's already crowded. No, I've never felt that way. And someone asked Scott Strickland about it today, and his quote about this crowded market out there and whether Florida should have entered it was, what other schools are doing shouldn't impact the University of Florida. End of sentence, end of thought, and should be end of conversation because he's right. Florida is the program that other folks already in the market should hope don't enter the market. Because if the right folks have their hands on the wheel at Florida, they can come in and take the candidates that you otherwise would have had a shot at. It's not the other way around. You don't take the candidates Florida's going to have a shot at. There are only 2 or 3 programs out there, and I'm not even including USC in that conversation, so maybe LSU, and then you can kind of stop the conversation, that could even attempt something like that if the right decisions are being made at Florida, if the proper commitment is invested at Florida, which I have reason to believe it is. Thirdly, and this was probably, I think, the most misguided, or if you want to use a more direct term, foolish notion that we have heard presented about Florida in general in the last month. And that is this notion that expectations have just been too high there. So it's not Dan Mullen's fault. Expectations are just too high. Because for some reason, there is this camp. It's a small camp, but there is this camp of people amongst the Florida media ecosystem, did I say that right? Media ecosystem, that believe the expectation there, for whatever reason, should not be championships, should not be perennially competing to win the SEC. And again, I've voiced my disagreement with that. But someone asked Scott Strickland about it. And again, he didn't answer this any different than I would if I were the AD at Florida. I've got it written. I don't know why I took time to waste ink on this. Someone said, are the expectations too high at Florida, Scott? He said, no, I don't think so. That was it. That was all he said. And then it was this awkward pause, and you could tell everyone on the Zoom call was waiting. Is he going to expound on this? And then they realized, oh, he kind of said no, so I guess he doesn't need to expound. Good for Scott Strickland. Those are words. They have to back them up with an action of hiring the right guy. I get all that. But I would much rather have someone who is at least saying the right things leading my program over someone who stumbles all over themselves and keeps adjusting their glasses and fumbles through prepared statements. That's not what he did. He spoke off the cuff, and he spoke honestly, and now let's hope that this gets put into action, and then those dominoes fall, and the last one has the name of what turns out to be a championship-winning head coach. Where will the search go, though? That's what everyone wants to know. Where's the Florida coaching search going to go? Well, the first thing I want to know, and these are kind of tied, the first 2 points I'm going to make, they're kind of tied together. First two things you got to know about the Florida coaching search. Number one, how do you define an elite candidate? How much do you value recruiting? If you had a pie chart, how big is the percentage that you want focused on recruiting? How much do you value in-game strategy? Do you look at that whole Ted Lasso, Sam Pittman model where, well, let's go get an energizer. Let's go get a CEO type. Maybe we don't value a guy who has cut his teeth as a perfectionist or a guy who's at the top of his craft on a particular side of the ball. Maybe we trust a guy to come in here and bring those assistants in because we're going to give him a big enough salary pool. Also, is there a certain way, as it turns out, that Florida prefers to win? This may sound dumb, but it is a very, very popular notion around Florida that it's not just about winning, although that is the name of the game at the end of the day. There's a certain way they want to win. They want to win the way Steve Spurrier did it. They don't want to win 13-9. They want to win flashy. They don't care about getting in your face. They don't care about rubbing you the wrong way. They don't care about every now and then a quote coming out of the mouth of the head coach that rubs some people the wrong way. Which is why the first name a lot of people are going to have come into mind when they think about an open job at the University of Florida is Lane Kiffin. And I guarantee you the University of Florida has always been on the tip of Lane Kiffin's tongue. And he'd probably bear crawl over broken glass the moment this job was offered to him, if it is. I had a former head coach in the SEC text me a little while ago. And he said, what do we think about Kiffin at Florida? And here's what I think about Kiffin at Florida. I'll tell you the same thing I told him. There's no one who is indifferent on Lane Kiffin. You are either red hot on him or you're ice cold on him. Here's what I believe the case to be. I believe the case is in any given major athletic department when you have to have a certain amount of endorsement. Even if you're the guy, even if Scott Strickland is the guy running this thing, or at LSU, even if Scott Woodward is the guy running this thing, this is the real world college athletics at a high level. You're not making a hire against the better wishes of certain people. Let's just put it that way. And what do those certain people think? With Lane Kiffin, it's been very hard to get a consensus buy-in amongst all those important people. So at Florida, the same question that exists at LSU or any other major job where Kiffin's name is spoken will be this. Do you have sign-off from all the voices that you need sign-off with? And it's been very hard when you've spoken to folks behind the scenes in both the coaching world, administrative world, and the agent world. It's been very hard for the representation of Lane Kiffin to get that consensus sign-off. Normally what it is there are a couple of folks who say, Kiffin would kill it here. And then there's one person over there who says, yeah, but what about this? And then there's this other person over the corner, yeah, and I don't want to worry about this either. Now you can fill in the blank with whatever this may be. I'm telling you, the guy's handled himself very well at Ole Miss. And I'm also telling you, there are a lot of folks out there who would say, Jeff Lebby doesn't get enough credit there. Jeff Lebby does a lion's share of the hauling on that offense. Okay, great. I'm not gonna disparage Jeff Lebby. Lane Kiffin, man, he's making a killing getting those former Baylor assistants that can't really go anywhere else, or Kendall Briles, and that's how he's done it recently. Well, good for Lane Kiffin if that's the case. All you've just accused him of is going and getting really good assistants. Why should I believe that wouldn't be the case at Florida? I can tell you this. Here's what I think. Because I've got my number one. It's not Lane Kiffin. I got my number one, and I'll list them in a second. I will at least say this. One of the most fundamental things I've always wanted to achieve in a coaching search is making my opponent sweat when I make the announcement. And God bless Mark Stoops and some of the other names who are going to be mentioned in this search. There are going to be a lot of quality candidates. I think Billy Napier would be a very good hire here. I would never leave Kentucky if I were Mark Stoops, but he'd be a quality hire. None of them, and friends, I mean none of them, would make the folks in Athens, Georgia, sweat more than if they woke up tomorrow morning and Lane Kiffin had been hired at the University of Florida. That's not me telling you he's necessarily the right one. I'm just telling you, you know good and well what I'm talking about. If you're a Georgia fan, you wake up tomorrow morning and you see Billy Napier hired and you see in an alternate universe Lane Kiffin hired. Which one makes you sweat more? I mean, I think you know the answer to that. Now, the guy I'd go after if I had an open head coaching position right now, coast to coast, would be Dave Aranda. I don't think he is restricted to succeeding in a specific region. I could not care less if I had an opening in San Diego, California, or Bangor, Maine. They need to take football a little more seriously in Maine, and you know I've always thought that. But if I had a job opening at the University of Florida, Southern Cal, LSU, anywhere in between, Dave Aranda is my number one call. Dave Aranda is the guy who checks every single box that I want. Dave Aranda knows how to build and then lead an organization. He knows how to get buy-in. He knows how to instill championship culture. Scott Strickland at Florida today spoke about a sustained product of excellence. That means you can't have the wild swings. It can't be a roller coaster. You got to get to a cruising altitude, and you got to have a guy who knows how to get it off the ground. But then once you get it off the ground, you also got to have a guy who knows how to fly it. And it's not up and down. It's not up. Your tray table's not having to stay in its upright and locked position because there's so much turbulence. No, you cruise at a high level. Dave Aranda is the guy I believe that is uniquely equipped, even unto any of these other candidates out there, to achieve that. He would do it at Florida. He'd do it at USC. He'd do it at LSU. Dave Aranda is, while he may not be represented by the right folks, Dave Aranda is the right guy for your job. And so that's the one I would push for at Florida. And if I were running both organizations, then I would compete against myself at LSU and Florida for the same person. Dave Aranda is the guy for all these jobs. There is going to be a lot of regret down the road for, I think, some programs, not just Florida. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think LSU is pursuing him hard enough. And I hope that that changes, for their sake, because it would be a shame for Aranda to have come through the South and then get locked down by USC. And I don't necessarily have the best feel for where USC is in their search. But I do think there have been some names mentioned in their search that probably in reality aren't at the forefront nearly to the degree that, let's say, the college football media sphere has led you to believe. I think Dave Aranda is there. And if USC does end up locking him down, then that would be a home run. Florida should very much go after Dave Aranda. That is my field. Billy Napier is going to be a name that's mentioned a lot here, as I said a little while ago. Billy Napier has waited for this job. Billy Napier has slow played some other programs with job openings in hopes of seeing something like this come open. And it's open now. And the folks at Florida, I think, would be very receptive, and by folks I mean fans. I think the fans there would be very receptive to a Billy Napier hiring. The thing about it is, and I'll move on here, we're going to talk a lot more about this week. There are not 5 Grand Slam candidates out there as you would define Grand Slam. But I want you to remember how many Grand Slams have fizzled out and how many bunts have ended up being Grand Slams. Dabo Swinney is the most famous example that comes to mind, but I think most recently about Ryan Day. Ohio State had the unique opportunity to not even have to leave the zip code up there to find the right guy. But Ohio State could have had their choice of almost anyone. And they went with Ryan Day. Why? Because they ignored all the hot boards out there, and they just knew the characteristics they were looking for, and they got the guy that fit the most of those characteristics. It's the exact same thing Florida has to do. What are the critical traits and characteristics they're looking for? We expect to learn a lot more about that in the coming days. Yesterday was a very cold day indeed in Columbus, Ohio. Luckily, for yours truly, I have the proper relationships with folks at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Otherwise, I am not equipped. My closet itself is not equipped for me to withstand such conditions, but the folks at Academy got me hooked up. And so I was relatively toasty yesterday. And here's what I want to tell you. You can be too. This cold weather is going to envelop the nation. It's called winter, and it's not going anywhere. But here's the good news. Neither is Academy Sports and Outdoors. And every time I go north of where I live right now in Nashville, where the frequency of seeing Academy Sports and Outdoors locations gets less and less, the more and more I get told, well, it's okay because you told me about academy.com. Yes, I did. Sioux Falls or Tucson, it doesn't matter. Academy.com, as long as you got internet, it works. So Academy Sports and Outdoors, great place to go. And if you need tailgating equipment, they got it. Or if you just need a fleece with your school's logo on it, they got that too. But make sure you do it, and you do it for the right reasons. The right reasons, in my humble opinion, is that they support the show. And so we keep this thing totally free of charge, in large part because of Academy Sports and Outdoors. So I'm not telling you to go out of your way to do something you weren't already going to do. You've got to make purchases, guys. And if you are benevolent, or benevolent is the word I wanted to use. You can tell they didn't write benevolent in the copy. They would have written benevolent. If you are benevolent, like Director Colin, for example, or Producer Jesse, always looking to do for others, Christmas time is rapidly approaching. And so I'm just telling you, I will give you my guarantee that if you are ordering, not their guarantee, mind you, my guarantee, so I'm responsible. If you're ordering from academy.com, little Susie and Johnny are going to love it when they unwrap it. How could they not? And quite frankly, if they don't love a present from academy.com or Academy Sports and Outdoors, I question their character a lot more than the quality of the product. Again, you can tell them, and you can quote me on that. So you may have a little soul searching to do with your kids if they don't like the present from Academy Sports and Outdoors, but they'll like it, so you probably won't have to worry about it. It seems that every time I talk about Academy, by the way, the VO of the Virginia Tech mascots and fans and whatnot jumping up and down, it always plays at the exact same time in the background, which is my favorite part of the show. So yesterday, there were varying degrees of just utter blowout all across the country, and I was at one. Let's start with that, shall we? Ohio State just completely and totally annihilated Michigan State yesterday in biblical manner. 56-7 is the final score. They could have at least hung 80 if they wanted to. I don't know that there was anything standing in the way of them rewriting the entire record book for the Big Ten, Ohio State, college football, everywhere in between. A complete TVMA special in the horseshoe yesterday. I had not even lost the feeling in my fingers before it was already out of reach. That's how quickly it went sideways for Michigan State. Sometimes you see a team get up early, and your nature is to say, okay, long game, still the first quarter, still plenty of time. But then there are other occasions where you see the manner in which a team gets up 14 or 21-0, and you say, there's no prayer. There's no way. That team in green right there might as well be a piñata. And they were. They were, friends. It was bad, bad, bad. So I don't know that there's ever been a more violent first half. In a consequential game, mind you, there was a number next to Michigan State's team, and it was, I think, 7. What were they ranked going into this? Like 7th? I'm going to talk about Michigan State. It sounds like a hate fest. I'm not hating on them. In fact, I got a lot of good things to say about them, just not from yesterday. The first half here is as violent as anything you will ever see in major college football. Ohio State hangs 500 total yards. And this is the time where I already need to pause and remind you, I am not giving you game totals. These are not 2 or 3 week totals. This is after 30 minutes of football, or something along those lines. 500 yards total offense. Ohio State ran 49 plays in the first half, and really, it could have been a lot more. They just kept scoring too fast. In fact, it's a miracle it even took them 49 plays to amass these totals that I'm giving you. They only had 2 third downs. I want you to think about this for a second as I adjust. I'm already getting uncomfortable reading this stuff. Ohio State ran 49 plays. They were so lethal, only 2 of the 49 plays were third down plays. And it should be noted, they were 2 for 2 on those third down plays. And it also will shock you, they didn't have to go for it on 4th down. C.J. Stroud, again, these are first half totals. 29 of 31. 393 yards. This is not the metric system. This is just good old-fashioned stat keeping. 6 touchdowns in the first half. Could have had double digits if he wanted to. I mean, they really ground to a halt second half by choice. I want to stress that, by choice. They had 10.2 yards per play in the first half. So, yes, ugly. I saw parents shielding their children's eyes, and it was a really good idea. They finally found that ignition. Man, we talked about this, it seems like for years. In reality, it's been a month. Ohio State finally found the ignition. When you get a rental car, when you're in an unfamiliar vehicle and it's dark, and you sometimes got to fumble around, especially in the older cars where you actually had to take the physical key and put it in the ignition, sometimes it's hard. And so what do? Well, you just kind of feel your way around. But here's the thing. If that battery is worth anything and that key fits, once you get it in the ignition, all you got to do is turn it. And so Ryan Day has racehorse after racehorse after racehorse. He has a whole stable of them at wide receiver. He's got one of the best quarterbacks in the country who's a first-year starter. They got future NFL guys all over their offensive line. They've probably got the best running back in football, even though you hadn't heard his name as much as guys like Kenneth Walker. They just had to get the key in the ignition. Well, yesterday, you saw what happens when Ohio State gets that key in the ignition and turns it. It goes, and then it goes, and then Michigan State goes splat. And several other teams would if they were on the field with Ohio State yesterday. So what does this mean for the future? Because I almost got to a point yesterday where I asked, how much do I really take away from this? Because at some point, it is quite literally like beating a dead horse. And yesterday, the freeze point came into effect. The freeze point we used to talk about with 2018 Clemson or 2020 Bama, 2019 LSU. And we have not talked about the freeze point with any team this year because we have not seen any team be good enough. I haven't even talked about it with Georgia because Georgia is not a lethal offensive team. Georgia may be the best team in the country, but they don't fit these parameters that we normally talk about. The freeze point is this. It is the theory. It's not a theory, it's just a fact. In the modern college game, there are offenses in any given year, like I just mentioned, 2018 Clemson, 19 LSU, 20 Bama, that are so good that a vast majority of college football has no prayer of competing against them. It is called the freeze point. It's how we defined it. And it's the same way if you think about liquid, if you think about water. It could be 53 degrees or 33 degrees in your freezer. As long as you put the water in there and that number's above 32, no matter how high above 32 it is, if it's above 32, that water will never freeze. 53 or 33, you can leave it in there for 100 years, it's not going to freeze. However, once it gets down to 32.4, which is freeze point in Fahrenheit terms for water, then all of a sudden, it's no longer a question of can it freeze? Oh, it'll freeze. It's how long will it take it to freeze? And so then the question becomes, how far below the freeze point can you go? 32.4, 22.4 will freeze it a lot faster. 14.4 will freeze it even faster. Michigan State wasn't below the freeze point. They had no shot yesterday. And so it didn't really matter, 53-33. It didn't really matter if Ohio State scored 33 or 56 as they did. The point was Michigan State had no shot, and that was apparent early on by how free receivers were running all throughout the secondary. Honestly, it was like watching Devontae Smith against Ohio State in the title game last year. The question moving forward, if you play a Michigan on Saturday, is do they meet the freeze point? I'm a believer that Michigan meets the freeze point. I'm not a believer Michigan's a better team. And I'm a believer they should be an underdog in their own building because Ohio State is that much better. The question is not whether they're better. The question is, do they at least have a puncher's chance of competing? And you can't compete if the things like you're watching right now on YouTube are happening. You can compete if you are a certain caliber. Michigan is probably at least that caliber of team. They're probably a 32, 32.3, 32.4 kind of team. Then the question becomes, how long does it take? Well, also if you play Georgia down the road, Georgia's well below the freeze point, obviously. So the question is, how much success could you have against them? There is a break point for every team. And a lot of times, the break point when you're playing a team as good as Ohio State is well short of 4 quarters. Yesterday the break point was as soon as they kicked it off for Michigan State. But a lot of times, a team has a break point of about 2.5 quarters when they're playing good teams. Even if you get their best effort. Think about how many times you see a game go into halftime and it's close, and then the better team extends the margin in the second half, and you say, wow, yeah, it was a blowout, but man, I thought this was a game at half. It was. That's because that team's break point was about 2.5 quarters of football. Maybe 3 quarters of football. Well, Ohio State's going to come up on some teams who have break points. Every one of them does. And some of them may be shorter than 4 quarters. Some of them may be a little longer than 4 quarters. And that's going to be the question moving forward. And so that's why that line, when you looked at it against Michigan and it came out today and it's only 7.5, a lot of you said just that. It's only 7.5. It's not only 7.5. That's a very sizable number, especially when you're in a rivalry game of this magnitude going into someone else's backyard. And the stats and trends of the past don't really factor into that number nearly as much as you want to believe they do. It's just this year's teams facing each other. It's the freeze point. They may term it a different way. It's the freeze point. And when you got a team that meets it, it can radically change an outcome. It can take, the simple concept of just your DBs being able to run fairly decently with a receiver could flip that score yesterday 3 or 4 touchdowns. You have no clue because of how intricate and how bounce of the ball-y this game is. but it could happen. And so I wanted to close this particular game recap with one thing. There were a lot of jokes yesterday about Mel Tucker, and he's got this big contract extension, which hasn't publicly been finalized, by the way, but I believe it will be finalized. A lot of jokes about how they need to keep the receipt, or, maybe they could rip that thing up before the ink's dry. Look, some of that's just good-natured ribbing, but anyone who properly contextualizes this season for Michigan State understands it's been a miracle. The over-under total in wins for this team preseason was 4. Yesterday's loss sets them back to 9-2. So I heard some of you say, oh, I knew they were fraudulent all along. What in the world are you talking about? Fraudulent? They've hit the over by, 5 games or 6 games or something like that. They're not fraudulent. It's just the fact that because they've been such an overachiever, then they got lofted up into a stratosphere they probably didn't belong in quite yet. When we power rate them, for example, I haven't had them higher than 15. But if you're ranking them in playoff terms, of course you had to have them up in the top 10. They had earned that. This is not a fraudulent team. It's one of the best stories in college football this year. They ran into a buzzsaw. I would ask you this. If you think that team yesterday was fraudulent, or you think that's on Mel Tucker, I'd ask you, who do you think the best coach in college football is? Nick Saban, whoever. Just take Nick Saban, for example. If I put Nick Saban in East Lansing, Michigan last week and had him take that team into Columbus, how would the outcome have been any different? It wouldn't. You're stuck with the players you're stuck with. And those players, by the way, that sounds pejorative in nature, those players have gotten you to 9 wins. May get you to 10 wins. Who knows? You're going to get a really nice bowl game out of this. So good for Michigan State. Like yesterday was horrible for them, but overall good for Michigan State. Really good for Ohio State, though. A lot to play for now. We move on. Alabama 42. Arkansas 35. I think that first number doesn't really fool you all that much. The second number may surprise you at the very least. So you pull up the box score. Most of you got to watch this. I got to watch most of the second half on the flight home. But there are padlock stats that we use a lot of times on this show. And there are a lot of what should be padlock stats in this stat sheet that are not padlock stats, as it turns out. To be clear, when I say padlock stat, those are the stats that if I were to tell you on Friday, you wouldn't even need to watch the game because you're so sure you know the outcome. Well, Bama did win this game. But the numbers I'm about to give you should be padlock in terms of covering in a blowout. They nearly had 700 yards total offense yesterday. Bryce Young was 31 of 40, 559 yards, 5 touchdowns. I think he set all kinds of new passing records. And yet still 42-35 is the final. They had a lot of things in terms of like turnovers down near the goal line. They had a field goal flat out fall short. It was under 50 yards. That was kind of weird to see. So there were every one of those things that needs to go wrong for you to lose a game. They started to happen for Bama. Now they still won it, but they're such an uncharacteristic Alabama team relative to the last few years for being this late in the season. So we got the outcome we expected. We picked Bama to win. We thought Arkansas would cover. So here's the first thing you need to know. There's a lot of lying going on about the Arkansas Razorbacks football team. The first reason this was close yesterday, make no mistake about it, is because Arkansas is good. That's the first reason it happened. Bama's not elite, and Arkansas is good, contrary to what the record may tell you, because one of the big lies in this sport is you are what your record says you are. No, you're not. Case in point, University of Arkansas. Arkansas, if I did nothing else other than give them Cincinnati's schedule, would probably be a one-loss team, maybe better than being a one-loss team. They would have only been a dog in one game, I can tell you that, and they'd be the same team, but you'd all of a sudden think Bama beat a playoff contender yesterday. Why? Because you are not always what your record says you are. So the first thing you need to know about yesterday's outcome is it's due in large part to the fact that Arkansas is a good team. I've heard some folks suggest otherwise. I don't know what else to tell you. They're wrong. They're not understanding how to interpret what their eyes are seeing on the field and how to kind of cross-compare it to if you changed different external factors about a team. If I just changed external factors about Arkansas in terms of schedule and it would make them 5 games better, that means they're not bad. They never have been bad. It's just they got a really, really hard schedule. So that's the first thing you need to know. Second thing you need to know is Arkansas only had 110 yards rushing yesterday, and they still were in this thing late. Why is that? Well, it's because K.J. Jefferson had himself a day. It's because the Alabama secondary is not remotely on par with secondaries of the past, but Jefferson was 22 of 30 for over 320 yards through the air. Didn't throw any critical interceptions, so good on Arkansas. I mean, like they almost found a way to win this game because they are good enough to almost find a way to win this game. But as for Alabama, you know, if you've been watching the show every week, when they lost to Texas A&M, it was the wake-up call that they really should have had when they almost lost to Florida. But a lot of times you got to lose in order for guys to kind of get that jolt. What we said about Alabama after the A&M loss still rings true today, and you're starting to see a little bit more of it, at least attempted by Nick Saban. What we said after that A&M loss is this Alabama team can still win the SEC, but this Alabama team will not win the SEC with the current lineup they have on the field. The only shot they had, and I still maintain today, the only shot this Alabama team has of beating Georgia and winning the SEC in a couple of weeks is their young guys coming through. That 2021 signing class has to be utilized. And I'm not saying it's foolproof. I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm saying if they are going to win, those are the guys who will have to do it. They did not have enough difference makers at receiver. Well, what have you seen? Last night, you saw Christian Leary score his first touchdown. You've seen Ja'Cory Brooks had a good catch or two last night. Ajay Hall has found his way on the field a time or two. And so there's that. There's also this guy by the name of Dallas Turner, who is flashing more and more as he gets more and more opportunity. There's a guy named JaQuincy McKinstry. You probably know him as Kool-Aid. Josh Jobe has underachieved mightily for Alabama this year. McKinstry, therefore, has gotten more and more opportunity. I would argue he's the better player of the two right now. So there are a lot of young guys who are starting to find their way on the field. This is not the ideal blueprint. This is the mandatory blueprint when you lose the kind of talent Bama lost. In no world, even one where you recruit like they do, in no world do you lose the kind of talent they lost and just keep on ticking, just keep on cruising. You can't do it. You've got to have a whole lot of young guys really come into their own really quickly. So Bama's going to be a small underdog against Georgia in a couple weeks in Atlanta, as they should be. It is a winnable game. The things that have to go right for them are unknowns, though. And that's what's different. This team normally has everything figured out by this point, and they're going into battle with the stuff that's already figured out. They're going to have to go into battle with unknown in a couple of weeks. Could turn out really good. They could get beat by 3 touchdowns. Like anything's on the table in that game in a few weeks. But as for one more time with Arkansas before we move on, as for Sam Pittman, it is Sam Pittman versus Shane Beamer for Coach of the Year in the SEC, and I'm actually invested in this one. We're going to talk about Beamer in a second. I'm actually invested in this because these are straight-up phenomenal coaching jobs that have been done against all odds. I mean, literally against the preseason odds. Shane Beamer in South Carolina are going to a bowl game now. They beat Auburn in Florida in year 1 with a very inadequate roster, if we're being real with ourselves. And then Sam Pittman's over at Arkansas doing what he's doing. You know, they started 4-0. So Arkansas, it seems like a long time ago. But Arkansas was the talk of college football a little while ago. But then they lost 3 games in a row. That's the point, right there, where it starts 4-0, but then they're 4-3. That's where it's supposed to go off the rails. Then they rebounded, though, and they won 3 games in a row. And that includes wins over LSU and wins over Mississippi State. And then last night they pushed Bama. And so now they're 7-4. They are a 2-touchdown favorite against Missouri this week. We love them, so much so that they are going to be one of our best bets. We think they're going to finish 8-4, and that is several games above, obviously, the preseason Vegas win total. Phenomenal job by Sam Pittman and Shane Beamer. Bama's favored by 3 touchdowns in the Iron Bowl. Everybody gasps and holds their breath. I'm just telling you what the odds makers have put out there. Bama's favored by 3 touchdowns. We'll break the game down Tuesday. Several more added takeaways from this, a very busy Week 12. And by the way, the live chat is popping. So much so that I'm going to give you 3 hellos instead of the usual 1 hello. But I had to type hi for time purposes. So thank you so much for tuning in live. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Since I got 3,000 of you here right now, make sure you're subscribed. Because let me fill you in on something. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. Doesn't send you a bunch of spam mail. It greatly, see how wide my eyes got? Greatly helps us do some things that we want to do around here. And so I don't like begging, but I will. Ain't too proud to. So please subscribe. It's just that little button down there. I think it says subscribe. And then that's it. That's all. You just dust your hands off. You're done. So thank you. Most of you already have. Thank you. Several more Week 12 takeaways South Carolina beat Auburn yesterday. I get off the plane in Nashville. I'm walking through the terminal, and this game's wrapping up. And so I just see a bunch of grown men with their arms folded and their heads shaking violently to the left and right. And I know, uh-oh, Auburn found a way to blow another one, didn't they? Alternate headline, uh-oh, South Carolina pulled it out, didn't they? And sure enough, there it is. Well, one of them was watching Oregon get pasted. I'm about to talk about that in a second. He was off on a side monitor. The main monitor in B&A, it's the code for Nashville, was Auburn falling to South Carolina. And I saw how it ended. And did the punt touch him? Did it not touch him? I know what the argument has been today. But look, I want to talk bigger picture about this. I don't think people have any idea how big an achievement it is that Shane Beamer has got South Carolina headed to a bowl game in year 2. Oh, wait, he's not in year 2. This is year 1. It is year 1 under Shane Beamer. And the talk preseason, when I did media hits in South Carolina, and I do a bunch of them in that state and in the entire kind of area over there, was, what do we think here? 4 wins, 5 wins. There were very few people talking about 6 wins because the schedule was tough and because the team didn't look good. I mean, you got what you got to work with in year 1. Shane Beamer's got South Carolina going to a bowl game. Speaks volumes. And no one cares whether Florida's down. No one cares whether Auburn's down. South Carolina's down too. That's why you've got a new head coach. And the fact that they pulled games off against both of them in year 1, it will pay such dividends for them in recruiting. But it's so great to be able to sell, and it's so great to package up. You know, as that vision we always want to package up in year 1. It's so great to, at least for the time being, validate the hopes that a lot of folks had there when they backed one of their guys to be their head coach. You look at Shane Beamer, he's everything you want a South Carolina head coach to be. It sucks for you he doesn't have the experience. You know, it sucks for you he hasn't gone and won at 2 other stops, and you can just hire a sure thing. But you know what? Some folks around there were willing to gamble and roll the dice on an unproven commodity because he was theirs. He was one of them. And now Shane Beamer's come in, and he's giving them immediate return on investment, which is a rare commodity in this day and age. To read any good news on the newspaper page, some of you get it. If you know, you know. But this was, so that's a good look. It's a good look for South Carolina. But boy, on the other side of that coin, as most coins tend to do, there's another side. It's a tough look. There's no way to sugarcoat this. This is a tough look for Brian Harsin. It's a tough look for Auburn. There were some very sketch decisions made in this game yesterday. I'm not questions the play calling guy. I don't do it. But even I look at that 4th down, and you got very, 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 very short to go, and my man Tank Bigsby's down on the field, and you're throwing it deep, and that's interesting. It's an interesting concept. Now Brian Harsin said afterwards, well, you know, if we would have completed it, it would have been a good play. It's accurate. That did check out. So we fact-checked that, and it did check out. Independent fact-checkers confirmed. But it didn't work out. And it wasn't a good play call even if it did work out, actually. I'm messing around with you. It's a horrific decision, and he knows that, and they know that. There's going to be a lot of talk about Brian Harsin and the Washington head coaching position this week. I'm just getting you ready for it. This has been bubbling beneath the surface for 2 weeks now. That's been some of the whispers in the industry. It's been made public enough where I feel comfortable talking about it. I think there's some legitimacy to it. I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't think anything's decided. I'm not telling you anything like that. I'm telling you there is reason to take it seriously, and that's all I'm going to tell you. I'm going to move on. Utah 38, Oregon 7. I think 14 points were scored in this game after Oregon mentally had already gone to the locker room for the half. I was watching this game I think we were at 37,000 feet last night, and it was one of those aisle seat specials where you got the game on, and then the guy next to you is pulling this, and then the guy on the other side pretending like he's sleeping, but he's pulling this. And eventually I just had to tell him, it's okay, guys, you can watch. And so we're watching this game together. And it's about a minute change left until the half. You know, if you watched it, those of you who did, it's already 14-0. I mean, it's already going to be a tall task to ask of the Ducks in the second half to come back, but they can do it now. But then they give the ball back to Utah, and Utah just carves them up. They go down the field, boom, 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 touchdown. And it's 21-0. That is the cattle prod effect. When we talk about the cattle prod, that is the stun gun to the neck, and you are completely staggered. You don't know what to do. And then Utah ends up running a kick or a punt back, whichever one it was, right before the half. And I'm sitting there thinking, Oregon thinks this thing's 14-0. It's 28-0, just like that. As it turns out, the game was over either way. This is the worst loss for Oregon under Mario Cristobal. Everyone around the Oregon program seems to agree with that today. The padlock stat, all you needed to know Friday was Oregon ended up watching Utah go 11 for 14 on third down. Had I told you that game was going to have Oregon watching Utah go 11 of 14 on third down, you would have said that game's going to have Oregon watching Utah celebrate on their home field afterwards. And that's exactly what happened. Utah is another example of why you don't sell teams down the river in September. Utah started this season off very poorly. Utah has had so much off-the-field heartache. Tragedy, literally, off the field for Utah. But they kept searching for the ignition. They've been in that dark rental car too. They keep searching for the ignition. And you know what happened? As teams with adequate talent and good coaching tend to do, if you didn't give up on them and they didn't quit on themselves, they find it. They find a gear. Good teams aren't just bad all year. It's too long a season. It's 12 weeks. So guess what happened? Utah started getting better. And Utah came into the season. We picked them to win the Pac-12 South. Utah is playing at that level now. They're playing at that caliber level now. Now, they've already got 3 losses, so they're out of the playoff picture. But Oregon got a handful last night. That's the kind of team that Utah, I thought, was going to be capable of being all year. For whatever reason, it didn't pan out early. But, man, don't quit on teams. Don't quit on teams like that early in the year. Here's the second thing you need to know. They may face off again in the Pac-12 title game, but Oregon's got to take care of some business first. Oregon's got to play, well, they got to play Oregon State. They also got to play Coach Stewart up there at Oregon State, who, by the way, I'm going to credit my guy, George W. I'm going to call him George W. out on the West Coast. He knows who he is. He's got that beautiful blue check mark next to his name. He knows who he is. He's been campaigning. He's been campaigning for a certain head coach at Oregon State to be more predominantly mentioned in the USC coaching search. And George Reister is right. I don't like acknowledging it because he's wrong a lot of the time, especially when referencing me. But he's right. Jonathan Stewart's up there doing really good things at Oregon State. This is not going to be an easy game. I don't even know if it's Friday or Saturday right now. It's not going to be an easy game. And Oregon, they got to make sure they win this thing first. And they didn't last year. So they're going to make sure they win that one first. Cripplingly disappointing outcome for Oregon yesterday, to say the least. So they're out of the playoff picture. We're going to talk about that more in just a second. Clemson, well, they took care of Wake Forest, is what they did. And to put a finer point on it, they smoked Wake Forest yesterday. Just had a bad feel on this one. We had a great red-hot weekend, but one of the games we whiffed on spectacularly was this one. We had Wake plus 4.5. Never had a shot. It was just the wrong side. Everybody, and I mean everybody, scores on Wake Forest. Even Clemson. In their darkest offensive times, even Clemson scores on Wake Forest. 543 yards yesterday. They had 333 on the ground. They had 6.2 yards per carry. And they finally made some plays, 7 of 11 on third down. Their receivers looked like Clemson receivers. It was a great day to be a Clemson Tiger. Great weather, it looks like. So maybe some of you got a nice little late November base tan as well. Clemson is now, well, they always were, but they are still in position to, believe it or not, potentially win the ACC. What do they need to have happen? Well, don't worry. I was reading one of Chip Patterson's pieces on CBSSports.com. This is what they need. Clemson needs Boston College to beat Wake Forest. That just has to happen because Wake's only got, I think, 1 conference loss right now. Now, you may think to yourself, but it says they've got 2 losses there. And if I'm remembering correctly, one of those losses was to North Carolina, an ACC team. And obviously, Clemson's an ACC team, so, you fool, what do you mean they've only got 1 conference loss? Well, I'm not going to make it make sense to you, but I am telling you the North Carolina loss does not count as a conference loss. Because the North Carolina game, even though they share the same conference, was scheduled as an out-of-conference game. That's why I love college football. Sometimes you just got to go shruggy emoji. So yes, even though they're 9-2 with 2 losses to ACC teams, they have 1 conference loss, and therefore Clemson does need Wake to lose another conference game. So they need them to lose against Wake Forest, and then the only other thing Clemson needs to have happen is North Carolina State to lose to either Syracuse or North Carolina. There's a halfway decent shot that still happens. So the Tigers are still in it. Texas Tech's not. They got body bagged yesterday, 23-0 at the hands of Oklahoma State, which is a team that has a lot of Clemson resemblance. This is an Oklahoma State team that started off very slow, and now they've really found their groove. Here's the difference. Oklahoma State did not lose multiple games in the process. While Clemson was dropping some games, Oklahoma State was beating Missouri State by 7, and beating Tulsa by 5, and beating Boise by 1, and beating Texas by 8, but they all count as wins. And so in this case, as it turned out, wins were wins. Well, then Oklahoma State found a different gear, and now they're running it up on folks. And they also happen to be playing lights-out defense, and now they're surging. Texas Tech, they got over 100 yards total offense yesterday, but it took all 60 minutes for them to do it. I think they had 108 at the end of regulation, and now we've got Bedlam this week. And that is, for those unfamiliar, Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma. Sooners, 3.5-point dogs in Stillwater. 3.5-point dogs. So here's what you need to know about the Big 12 picture. Oklahoma State is, for my money, easily the best shot that this conference has of a playoff team. We're going to talk about it more in a second. These are the Big 12 standings. If Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma this Saturday or Friday, I get mixed up on the days for these rivalry games, there is no Sooner rematch. It is Oklahoma State versus Baylor, I believe, if it pans out that way, if Baylor takes care of business this week. So Oklahoma, their shot is to beat Oklahoma State and then do it again. That's what they have to do. So it is a very tall order. And we'll break that game down on Tuesday. Also, Cincinnati really handled SMU yesterday. 48-14 was the final. They had 4 different guys with at least 35 yards rushing. So this is obviously the way that you've expected them to play for a while. First question that comes to mind is what took so long. But then the compliment you give is, okay, well, better late than never, obviously. But is it better late than never? Well, I guess the obvious answer is yes. Did it come too late? And that we're going to talk about more in a second. Boy, a lot of teases in this segment, huh? I say that because we put these videos as individual videos on YouTube, so there is no in just a minute. You got to be watching the long form show for this to make sense. Cincinnati's got one more game before they go to the conference title game. And that is not going to be easy, and it's against a team that we've been high on and we've been riding for several weeks. We went 3 consecutive weeks winning, betting on them. We hit the pause button yesterday, and I'm speaking about East Carolina. We hit the pause button yesterday at just the right time. Well, Cincy's got to go to East Carolina this week. They are a 14-point favorite. Make no mistake, this is a losable game. It's not if they are surging at the right time. But I don't know what to make of yesterday's result. So Cincinnati's got one more game, then they got the conference title game. If they win both of those games, this is by far the G5's collective best shot ever of having a team in the playoff. And I figure, since we're talking about that, now is as good a time as ever to ask that question. If Cincy wins out, are they going to make the playoff? And that's where I pause so Colin can cut that video, and now I can transition into what I wanted to talk about for like the last 5 minutes. The playoff picture coming out of Week 12. In some ways it's cleared up, in other ways it's still very murky. So let's very, very quickly talk about what we know now that we did not know going into yesterday morning. We know Oregon's out of this thing. They were a top 4 team 24 hours ago. We know that the ACC is not going to have a team in the playoff, which we already did know. We now know the Pac-12 is not going to have a team in the playoff. We did not know that 24 hours ago. We know Michigan State is now done officially. We did not know that 24 hours ago. So the number 3 team and the number 7 team, we can remove them. They will not be in the college football playoff. Tuesday's rankings are coming, and there is going to be a very big deal made about where Cincinnati is in relation to Michigan. I do believe Ohio State may jump Alabama. We had Ohio State above Bama last week. We already made that move in the JP poll 2 weeks ago. We made that move. I think it may happen with the committee Tuesday night. Inconsequential, don't care. Here's my favorite sentence. It'll sort itself out. Well, I'm about to use my favorite sentence again because I don't really care much whether Cincinnati and Michigan are 4 or 5, respectively. I guess I think Michigan may be above Cincinnati, but I don't think I care all that much because, here comes the sentence, it'll work itself out. And it'll work itself out because I happen to have it on good authority. Michigan is playing Ohio State Saturday, and we'll be there, right there on the sideline for it. So it actually will work itself out. Now here's where it may matter whether Cincinnati is placed ahead of Michigan come Tuesday. It matters maybe because it gives you a little preview of how the committee views Cincinnati against other elite or approaching elite Power 5 teams. Now that won't matter when it compares them versus a Big Ten champion, because you will not have a scenario where it is Cincinnati or the Big Ten champ. It's not going to happen. If it's a 2-loss Big Ten champ, they're out, and if it's a 1-loss team, they're going to be in regardless. Where it may matter, and what it may come down to, is measuring Cincinnati, an undefeated AAC champ, against, let's say, like a 2-loss Alabama who just lost by 3 to Georgia. A lot of you are already rolling your eyes at that. Well, I'm not here to arbitrate this between you and the committee. I'm just telling you that may be what it comes down to. So if you see Cincy at 4 instead of 5, maybe a good indication that they've got a little more respect from this blowout win over Cincinnati or over SMU. It's not going to help their resume. And their actual resume didn't get boosted at all yesterday. They just beat up on another inferior team. I mean, that's what on paper it looks like. We'll see if the human beings agree with that. What about Notre Dame? So Notre Dame is still floating around there. There are shark fin in the playoff waters this year. They are, at last check, they were number 8. We'll see where they are this week. This is the first time that I think Notre Dame may be in line to cost themselves a shot at a playoff because they're not in a conference. This has never happened before. They've gotten in despite not being in a conference, but they've never had a spot taken from them because they didn't play in a conference. And it may be happening. Notre Dame, as I've said for a long time, is not going to join a conference because you want them to. They're not going to join a conference because it would make everything look more congruent and harmonious. There, in my estimation, has only been one thing that was going to entice Notre Dame to join a conference. And that is if the time ever came that they clearly cost themselves a spot in the playoff because they did not have a conference championship game to go play for and win. If this team were in the ACC this year, they would be obviously headed to Charlotte to play for the conference championship. They would be the favorite to win the conference championship, and they would be in prime position to make the college football playoff. As it stands right now, they are in all likelihood going to finish 11-1. They'll be sitting at home as they always do on conference championship Saturday. And it may very well be that they get boxed out of this thing. And even though I've agreed that Notre Dame belonged in the years they've been put in, I don't think they're going to belong in this year unless some things happen. And so there are certain disaster scenarios that are still out there. If Cincinnati loses either of these next 2 games, that's a disaster scenario that could put Notre Dame above them. I think that very well could happen. Also, if you have the Big 12 or the Big 10 bumper car scenario, where we have a spot open up that maybe we didn't think was going to open up, Notre Dame's not out of this. I'm just telling you, largely, if the chalk holds, they will be out of it, and it'll be largely their own doing. There's going to be a lot of talk. I can go ahead and get you ready for it. There's going to be a lot of talk Tuesday night about a 12-1 Big 12 champion. Let's just say it's Oklahoma State. Because I've already gotten a lot of you in my inbox asking about this. So I'll ask you again. You can talk in the live chat if you want to, even though I got to crane my neck to see it. But you can talk in the comment section if you're watching the replay. How would you measure a 12-1 conference champ Oklahoma State against the likes of a 2-loss Alabama? Or against the likes of a Notre Dame or a Cincinnati? I mean, I'm putting them in. Like, that's where my head's at right now. I'm having trouble with 2-loss Bama because the way we're normally talking about Bama, we've done this before, not 2 losses. But we've done this whole Alabama as a non-conference champ thing before. And I've advocated for them to be in. But it's because those Alabama teams were dominant teams that just happened to play in the wrong division. It was a year where more than 2 of the best teams were in the same division. That is not the kind of Bama team we're looking at this year. And I'm not on the committee yet, but I'm telling you, if it comes down to a 12-1 conference champ Oklahoma State, to show you I had no bias in 2011 when I was so hardcore on the other side of this, I'd probably advocate for Oklahoma State over a 2-loss Bama. In fact, I'm pretty sure I would. The only thing that's giving me a little trepidation is I don't know what I'm going to see in Atlanta in a couple of weeks. And let's just assume Bama's going to win Saturday in the Iron Bowl. Let's just assume that for argument's purposes. I don't know what I'm going to see. You know, like if I go to Atlanta and I watch them play a 2-overtime classic with Georgia and they lose by a point or something like that, that's a lot different than what I may think happens, in a couple of weeks. Like, I think Georgia is solidly the better team. And so what I'm saying is it may change my mind, and I may come out of it, and I can tell you a lot of other people, if that were to happen, they're going to come out of it saying the same thing. They're going to come out of it, and they're going to apply logic and power to a merit-based argument. Because logic and the more power rating mentality would say, hold on a second. If you're telling me Bama's number 2 or 3, and they played the number 1 team, and they barely lost to the number 1 team, doesn't that just validate that they're the second or third best team? The answer is yes, it would. But that's not how this works. This is a resume merit-based competition that is blended with power. So there is still a healthy respect if Alabama is that caliber team. But that's why you don't go lose to Texas A&M as a 18 whatever point favorite. You lose the opportunity to make that argument. You got one loss on that resume, that's a little bit different story. I'm just telling you, whether it's right or wrong, whether I power rate them highly or not, they are going to have lost that ability. Now, they're still going to be in the conversation. But as for me and my household, as the book of Joshua would start to say to you in, I believe, 24:15, it doesn't finish with the way I'm about to finish this sentence. I would put Oklahoma State in. That's who I probably would go with. But I think there's going to be a lot of talk about that Tuesday night, and that's where a majority of this conversation is going to center now. You're going to start to hone in more and more on how a 2-loss Bama is going to be accepted or not accepted. Will the 1-loss Big 12 champ, if we have one, have a good enough resume? There's a thought out there that Oklahoma may be out of it regardless. I got to see that to believe it. I'm just saying that's the thought out there. Does the Big 10 end up being Ohio State's? Does Michigan upset Ohio State Saturday and all of a sudden change the conversation entirely? Will Wisconsin be able to fulfill the Big Ten bumper car disaster scenario where we don't even have a Big Ten team in the playoff? That's what could really turn it upside down. So as you can see, there's a lot that's still very hazy about the playoff picture. What's not hazy is we are extremely red hot right now. We went, I want to say, 10-2 yesterday. So the Ramen Noodle Express is cruising, and really padding that percentage at the end of the year. So why stop? That's my question. Why stop? Now, this was the year, or this is the week, by the way, last year, that I was made a fool of. Is one of the weeks, let's just put it that way, where I've been made a fool of. This time last year, we gave out our single biggest bet of the season. Anyone remember it? Longtime viewers will. I cannot even begin to describe to you how confident I was in Virginia over Virginia Tech last year. And it just never happened. And I was stunned. I was the shocked monkey gif. Mouth wide open, looking to the left and right, stunned. So, what I'm trying to tell you is, I'm giving you these responsibly, and I am giving you them with the proper caution in mind. Let's jump on it. Northern Illinois, plus 3.5. This is a weeknight game. Ohio, minus 5.5. I believe also a weeknight game. NC State, minus 6.5. Get it? I think it's going to 7. Arkansas, minus 13.5. You have several of these out there, but there are also some 14s. Have yourselves multiple shops. Have yourselves multiple outs. Texas A&M, minus 6.5 against LSU. I can also tell you unequivocally, we will be on Minnesota. And if you see a 7 out there, they're playing Wisconsin. If you see a plus 7, grab it. It's one of our favorite games this week. We're not moving on it yet because it's plus 6.5. We think Minnesota's got a shot to pull an outright upset this week. So we're going to like it at any number. There is no sense in us moving on it at 6.5 at the moment. So we are going to stick with these 5. A&M minus 6.5, Ohio minus 5.5, Arkansas minus 13.5. Love Arkansas. NC State minus 6.5, and Northern Illinois plus 3.5. I imagine we're moving on at least 5 more games. We'll probably have double-digit games again this week. We're going to end very strongly. Do me a favor, by the way. I just put the advice there in the live chat. We have a huge week coming up. There's going to be a lot of coaching news. There is going to be, obviously, a lot of more betting picks. There is so much happening. December, late November and December is our highest trafficked month of shows that we do for obvious reasons. Make sure you're following on Twitter and Instagram because we don't have a show every hour. At Late Kick Josh, make sure you're following. So much is happening, so many different things. The iJosh, I got to keep the battery charged, but we are very blessed to have a lot of information coming in here, kind of like a hub of information. Try and get to you what I can get to you. You got to make sure you're listening to the pods and following there, as well as watching the shows on YouTube to get everything. We try and talk about everything you need to know on this show and leave out all the garbage you don't need to know. So thank you so much for watching tonight. Well over an hour, probably the longest show we've done. Told you we were jam-packed. Director Colin and producer Jesse did a heck of a job getting this show ready today. I just sat here with my little buck nut and talked. So thank you so much for you guys being tuned in. As I said, make sure you're following Twitter and Instagram at LateKickJosh. Full story about the trip to Columbus coming up on the Tuesday morning edition of the Late Kick Extra podcast. So keep that in mind, and also keep in mind, anyone in Ann Arbor in close proximity to the big house, I need parking for Saturday. I need parking, okay? And I want you to help me out. That's as plain as I can put it. So I'll be waiting to hear from you. Until then, again, for Colin and Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Have yourselves a great start to your Thanksgiving week, and God bless.